Welcome back, DC action figure fans, to the next next video. Well, the continuing series of DCU Classics Director's Commentary by me, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I am I was the brand manager. I guess I'm still the brand man. The toys still exist, but I'm not actively brand managing. Oh my god, I'm on such a tangent. All right, I worked for Mattel, and I was the guy who was in charge of marketing and overall direction for this line. How about that? I oversaw pretty much 90% of the bulk of the line. Waves I think 1 through 19. Wave 20 was the only one I didn't work on. I switched over to Star Wars Hot Wheels at that time, but that's a video for another time. We are going wave by wave, talking about kind of the inside scoop behind the scenes on character selection and what each wave was about. And this video is about Wave 9, which is this wave here, jam-packed with lots of, all over the map, from cosmic to street level. So let's jump in. Roll call time. So the first figure in this wave, kind of our lead sort of A-lister, is Green Arrow. Now this was before the Arrow TV show. I want to say it was before the show was on. Maybe someone's going to correct me and say the show was already on. So maybe he was more popular in sort of the general public at the time. But I love this pack out. This was one of my absolute favorite pack outs of the entire sort of series, or all of the waves. It was really cool getting to put all the arrows like that. And I'll get into the arrow that was lodged in the bow when I get to him. Next up, we have kind of his romantic interest, none other than the sonic screaming kick-butting, as in the verb to kick butt, Black Canary. Also a figure that had some controversy over the design choices. We'll get into that. Next up, from Jack Kirby's Fourth World, we have Mantis. And much like a lot of the Fourth World characters that Jack designed, when it came time to putting them in the DCU Classics line, we wound up doing not just one version, but we wound up doing 2 different versions of that character so that we could sort of cover both iconic versions. And sometimes these variants wound up actually digging deep into the tooling budget, because it wasn't just like a simple repaint. The robot versus human versions of Mantis took quite a lot of, different parts. It wasn't just a straight repaint. Next up, the deadly Deadshot, made a little more famous in the Suicide Squad film, portrayed by Will Smith, but Floyd Dawson here in his traditional outfit with his wrist blasters and trademark scope over the eye, if you will. Is it a scope? I guess that's what it is. Following that, we have the boxing superhero Wildcat, and this one also a variant in the line, but in this case it made sense to do both his sort of kind of dark blue and light blue variants, because he often sort of switched colors between having a kind of lighter bluish purplish outfit versus a straight black outfit, and it was just a deco swap, so that made it easy to do both. Following that, a big villain in the wave was Black Adam, complete with his scarab beetle necklace. Shazam, or Captain Marvel, he'll always be Captain Marvel to me in the CC Beck time, is one of his big villains. And then another Jack Kirby character we had was Guardian, complete with his trademark shield and his sort of yellow and blue and gold outfit, I guess depending on who's drawing him at the time. But we went with more traditional yellow, because yellow tends to pop well with toys, and he tends to be yellow in the classic stuff. All right, lineup complete, roll call done. Let's dive in and go character by character and kind of talk about why we chose each character and how they wound up making up Wave 9 in the DC Universe Classics lineup from Mattel, which was awesome. Now, about this time of Wave 9 is when people started really asking for Martian Manhunter. And when they noticed he was not in this wave, there was definitely a lot of like, why have you not gotten a Martian Manhunter? Well, this wave did have an A-lister. As far as DC is concerned, Green Arrow, especially with the TV show, he is a very popular character. So it made sense to hold Martian Manhunter for now. And he was already planned for Wave 11. But fans didn't know that. And I definitely remember getting a lot of feedback that, wait, you're doing Green Arrow, but you haven't done Martian Manhunter yet? He's, a founding member of the Justice League. But hey, Green Arrow is pretty big. He was definitely, sort of our, I guess we always made sure each wave had what was called an anchor character. In the first year, that was a lot of Superman and Batman, and a lot of that was because the first year's waves were sort of dictated by DC and Warner Brothers, down to the character selection. Now that we were on our own and we had built that trust with Warner, which was great, I mean, they were fantastic partners, that they were allowing us to select the characters, but we still wanted to anchor each wave. And Green Arrow made sense as a good anchor because we could do characters he fought against and love interests. We eventually actually did the modern version, which is that one, but we wanted to go with classic because for multiple reasons. One, he was just on the Justice League Unlimited show, coming sort of hot off the heels of that show and how popular that was. He became a big character in that. Fans are going to also ask about the bow and arrow. The reason that the arrow had to be lodged in permanently is a safety issue. If it's not in there and there's a string, it's considered a slingshot by legal, and we can't ship weapons. I know, it's weird, but that was kind of the rule. So that's why the arrow was lodged in there permanently. And then, of course, another big reason we did this version of Green Arrow was Superpowers. I've mentioned in some previous videos, I even did a video just about Superpowers, which you can see linked here. We wanted to really pay homage to that line. And Green Arrow, particularly in the Superpowers line, has an interesting heritage because a lot of the figures in Superpowers were rehashes of other toys, like Star Wars toys in this example. But in the case of Green Arrow, he wound up being reused in the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves line as none other than Robin Hood himself, which is why Robin Hood has a G on his belt. So, it's just interesting part of toy history. He also donated parts to the Sheriff of Nottingham. So it was definitely interesting, how that Robin Hood line kind of hodgepodged through Superpowers and Star Wars to kind of kit bash the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves line. So anyway, just an interesting note about toy history. Moving on to Wildcat, first off in his sort of traditional blue outfit. And as I noted earlier, while the blue outfit he was wearing even in modern times, he kind of went back and forth a lot, sometimes depending on the artist, between black and blue. And since it was just a simple deco swap, there was no additional tooling needed, unlike the Mantis variant, which we'll get to. It made sense to just do a sort of a 50-50 deco difference. He did get newly tooled parts, including the bandage-wrapped arms and wrists, and of course, he needed his own head. But otherwise, Wildcat was a pretty straightforward figure and didn't require too much tooling, which, of course, was going to allow us to pay for other figures in the line. It's always good, you kind of have to find that balance between low-tooled and highly-tooled figures in each wave to sort of divide up the tooling budget. The low-tooled figures kind of help offset the cost and pay for those figures that are highly tooled. And, much like Green Arrow, Wildcat also coming off a lot of popularity. He had a larger role in the Justice League Unlimited show. Not as large as Green Arrow had, but and they actually had a lot of screen time together, ironically. So it also kind of worked to have them in the same wave for those who were following the show, and the toy line and the show were still kind of very popular. My favorite, actually, for appearance of Wildcat personally was his cameo in the Justice League New Frontier series, where although the series focused kind of on the main Justice League characters in an alternate kind of 1940s timeline, Wildcat does appear as a boxer. He's not fully done as a superhero, but there's a scene where they're in Vegas at a boxing match, and of course the gentleman doing the boxing is Wildcat, and I always thought that was great. That was one of the things about New Frontier that I just really loved, was those kind of details, is sneaking Wildcat in there in a logical way. All right, Guardian. So coming up next, as we head into our sort of Jack Kirby-esque part of the wave, and yeah, there were definitely, all of DCU Classics was very heavy with Jack Kirby characters and Fourth World characters, and well, that's because they were so cool. They were really visually awesome, and absolutely, like I was saying about Superpowers, even though Guardian was not a figure in Superpowers, Superpowers became kind of the template for DCU Classics. And you can go back, and I flagged the video you could watch back at that Green Arrow shot earlier in the video. But essentially, because Superpowers was kind of becoming this template that we were following, and it was so heavily populated by Jack Kirby characters, other Jack Kirby characters that never made it into Superpowers, like Guardian here, perfect example, wound up being in the DCU Classics line. And we didn't want to do the modern version specifically because we wanted to do kind of the version if he was in Superpowers, what would his toy have looked like in sort of a hypothetical, alternate reality. Maybe in the New Frontier reality. Maybe in that reality, Guardian had a Superpowers toy. Who knows? I love alternate realities. Next up, a villain, a bad guy, Black Adam. So Black Adam was is one of Captain Marvel, aka Shazam's major bad guys. I think there's a movie in the works with The Rock playing Black Adam, which is like perfect casting if that comes together. And yeah, I mean, he's an awesome character. A lot of Captain Marvel's villains were not very muscle bound. I mean, you had, mad scientists, and you had worms, characters that weren't really, very muscular. I mean, I know that, Mr. Mind could control apes and stuff, but Black Adam was his equal. He was kind of like, the how in all the Marvel movies there's always an evil version, basically, of the character. He was the evil version of Captain Marvel, and he tended to be a talker, too. He definitely had a mouth on him. But, he had the long nose and the long chin and the evil Spock ears before Spock had them. And he had his own version of Shazam with his own meaning for each of the letters. So he was the evil counterpart coming from Egyptian mythology of Captain Marvel, who got his powers more from the Roman Greek pantheon of gods. But that's a whole other mythology for another time. And, he had a big history, in DC Comics, whether he was, appearing on the old 80s TV shows. And at the time this wave was shipping, or at least when it was created, he was just coming off of some of his appearances in some major DC storylines, including things like 52, World War III, and the Justice Society relaunch relaunch at the time, where he was kind of a major villain. It was that whole Gog and Magog thing, and then at the end, Black Adam shows up in the last volume of that, facing off against the Justice Society. So again, very popular. At the time the line was being worked on, which is always 2 years before it ships. So it's always good to consider that when you're looking at a wave, what was happening 2 years prior to that wave shipping. Who was in the comics that was getting in. All right, and next up we have Black Canary, a figure that has definitely some controversy. Not just because, because she's because of her legs. Her legs were the controversy. Not because they were too sexy. She's a very sexy character with the fishnet stockings and all that, which are definitely part of her trademark look. There were versions of her where she did not have the fishnets, and that was usually a lot of times an animation because you couldn't draw that. And much like being able to draw in an animation, being able to deco that in a toy is really not going to happen because it's going to be too expensive. You can't do that much deco. She would have broken the bank from a deco perspective if we had decoed the stockings. So I know she's a fighter, which requires articulation, the idea that she's, going to kick people in the face. And Bill Beneke and I went back and forth on this, like, what do we do? And at the end of the day, we went with getting the stockings right over articulation, which meant our solution was to give her actual stockings, actual cloth stockings that went over her legs. But because of this, it limited the articulation because it would have ripped the stockings. And yeah, I know there were fans who wished we went the other way, and instead of the cloth stockings, or over her legs, the fishnets, they would have preferred articulation. And I kind of thought in the long run we would have done another version of her, where we would have just painted her legs, kind of like they did in the Justice League Unlimited cartoon show. We never got to that, and I get it. Yeah, you can't win them all, but that was the reason. So next up, Mantis in his robot form, well, actually kind of both Mantises, because much like the parademons that had two very distinct versions, we wanted to do both kind of a iconic version and the version that was in Superpowers. So the robot version was the one that showed up in the Superpowers line, but the humanoid version is the one that tended to be, I guess, more popular, if you will, overall. He is a major Superman villain, so this just made sense. Let's just do them both. They had the same color scheme. Green and yellow really pops on shelf, especially against the orange of the DC Universe packaging at the time, so we knew it was going to look really good in packaging. And Human Mantis has that awesome mask, and like we said, I mean, he's a big Superman villain. He had a big role in Justice League Unlimited as well. I know I tend to talk about that a lot, but I mean, the show was just ending, just coming off the air, and that was a major introduction to sort of the mass public to a lot of these characters. So, of course, again, checking off our obligatory Superpowers collection version of the character was doing the robot one. Personally, I'm more of a fan of the human one, but, we wanted to do this. Our goal was always to try to complete Superpowers. And, I think that's a big thing for Toyline, just to be able to do that. It really helps make collectors, like myself, feel like you won. Getting that complete collection, getting every figure redone in a specific style, as a version of a vintage line is very, very fulfilling. And, I wish all toy lines would do that. I'm looking at you, Hasbro. Where's my Imperial Dignitary and my mustached Bespin Guard? All right, that's a video for another time. So, yeah, like I said, I'm a collector too. Next up, we had Deadshot. And again, very popular character. I mean, I think Deadshot and Deathstroke are, well, they're kind of like the Deadpool together of DC, even though Deadpool was completely a ripoff of them. It was actually meant to be a spoof of them. I mean, Deathstroke's name is Slade. Deadpool is Wade. So he was absolutely a spoof of these kind of characters, and it's funny how much Deadpool has taken off, but both Deathstroke and our Deadshot character here were sort of, they were the original, mercs with a mouth, if you will. And this was before Will Smith took over as kind of the public version of him from the Suicide Squad film. And I'm all for ethnic diversity, and I thought Will Smith actually totally owned the role, but Floyd in his classic look, is Caucasian, even though we didn't do a maskless version. But we did very specifically do the classic version. And, I don't know why we didn't do the maskless head like we did with Deathstroke. I think he could have probably benefited from it. It might have been a tooling issue in the wave because of how much tooling went into characters like Robot Mantis. So, yeah, if you don't like the fact that you didn't get a maskless Floyd, you can blame Mantis, I guess. Although I think Mantis will probably rip you in half. He's more powerful. But we did, we gave him his wrist guns and, all of his iconic, the tones and the details in the outfit. He did take a bit of tooling. And, I mean, he's one of those characters that's a very kind of modern classic DC villain. He doesn't go back to the Golden Age, but he's definitely, a very iconic DC villain. And I'm really glad we got to him sooner than later. So that brings us to our Build-A-Figure. So this Build-A-Figure was one of our biggest if not the biggest of all time, as far as, size and height and width and, breadth of his arms. I mean, he had like these giant limbs. And doing Chemo was, we wanted to look at which version we do. And definitely the version we did, which is kind of his iconic look at this point. It's got those, the kind of, I mean, does he have eyes? I don't know. Are those, just knobs? It's kind of one of those weird things, but it looks like eyes. And that really, I think at least it makes it look like he's got a face. Versus things like, the original version of Chemo is just more blobby and didn't have all of the robotic parts on him. We could have gone for this, but I'm really glad of the version that we did do. Chemo is, I think, one of the best Build-A-Figures we did, probably next to Solomon Grundy. And the version, I think, just stands out. There's obviously height issues because Chemo has been, he can be ginormous. He can be the size of a building. And obviously, we weren't going to be able to do a Build-A-Figure that was the size of a building, despite Marvel Legends doing Galactus and the Sentinel years earlier. That was before the sort of skyrocketing cost of plastic. So we had to kind of compromise, and he wasn't exactly going to be huge, but he wasn't going to be small either. And I think the fact that he was sort of one of our biggest Build-A-Figures speaks to that, to how much we wanted to really play up his height. Now you'll notice there at the bottom right there, that little extra bubble piece, that was from inside of him. That was a piece that was inserted inside of his torso in order to create that bubbly kind of look in the plastic. And there are variants of Chemo, because the first units, what happened in the PP production pilot version, did not get that extra piece. I think it was either left out, or honestly, I don't remember the exact logistics of why it didn't get included, but you'll notice with the head, there are two versions. There's the version with and without that extra piece. The ones with the piece are, if you will, the corrected version. But honestly, some fans prefer this version with less bubbles. It's kind of almost a personal choice. Or, the version with more bubbles, with that extra plastic piece inside. But that's why there's two different versions. It's, I think, one of the only Build-A-Figures that sort of has a legitimate variant, in the fact that it's legitimate because one has an extra plastic piece inside and one does not. This wasn't a deliberate variant where we, tried to do this on purpose. It sort of happened by fluke, but we were able to insert the extra bubble piece, and that's why some have more bubbles. And there you go. So, he looks cool even without that piece. This is the version without the extra bubbles. And that was the wave, even without Martian Manhunter. Still an amazing wave, and we're kind of almost at the halfway point. Next wave will be the halfway point for the DCU Planet 6 journey. And with that, we'll wrap up Wave 9 and be excited for the next video coming right around the corner.